It's the Wiltfong Whip Around with Steve Wiltfong. Today is Monday, May 13th. I'm your host, Josh Newberg. Excited to be here. Some big news went down over the weekend. But first, guys, make sure you are subscribed to the best recruiting channel in all of the land. Go ahead, hit subscribe for me, please. Also, get the Wiltfong Whip Around on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. All right, it's time to get into all the action from the weekend. Nebraska landed their 8th commitment of the 2025 cycle, and it is a big one. Four-star quarterback TJ Lateef, the number 25 ranked quarterback in the country. He committed to the Huskers on Sunday, and now that he's off the board, let's bring in Steve Wiltfong because I want to know how they're going to build around him. Let's bring him in. Steve, we know TJ Lateef out of the state of California, committed to Nebraska on Sunday, but what's next for the Huskers? How do they kind of build this offensive recruiting class around Lateef now that he's on board?
Well, Nebraska can certainly point to saying, hey, we are recruiting the quarterback position as well as just about any program in America right now. When you look at what they did in the 2024 cycle, Josh, who recruited quarterbacks better than Nebraska when they flipped Dylan Raiola, the legacy recruit, longtime commit to Georgia. They flip him late in the cycle. He joins Daniel Kalen. And around that facility, I think they think both those quarterbacks have pro potential. And obviously, they're very excited about Dylan Raiola and that era kicking off here, coming off a strong spring game. And now TJ Lateef, four-star quarterback, top 25 player at the position. They're recruiting to a standard at quarterback. So when Nebraska goes on the trail and they hit Florida hard, they hit Texas hard, and they hit California hard, and they try and protect the key guys in state and go from there, they can point to this quarterback recruiting run that they're on and say, hey, come play with some of the best arms in America.
Yeah, and you can feel it. Recruiting momentum is building in Lincoln. You talked about it last week. We had Sean Callahan on last week, also talking some Nebraska recruiting. And like I said, they're at 8 total commitments right now, still room to grow. Who do you think could be the next to commit to the Nebraska Cornhuskers?
Well, I still like my on-3 RPM prediction in favor of Nebraska for four-star running back Jamarian Parker out of St. Louis Cardinal Ritter High. Similar to the way they went out and landed TJ Lateef, I don't think there's a program in the country that's built as strong a relationship with Parker. And when you talk to Parker's head football coach, Brennan Spain, about the process, he says Jamarian is a relationships guy, heavy on that component. And I don't think he has better ones than the ones he has at Nebraska right now.
We know Nebraska likes to make the in-state guys, the elite in-state guys, a priority. Who are they chasing right now in the state of Nebraska?
Well, they currently have 4 guys committed in-state as they try and make a run at another top 25 recruiting class. There's 2 guys in-state, the number 1s and number 2 players in the state that are national recruits. You have 4-star linebacker Christian Jones and on 300 tight end Chase Lofton. So those guys are as coveted as anybody that they have on the board. Both were on campus for the spring game. They love that atmosphere. They love the direction of the program under Matt Rule and the second-year staff. For Chase Lofton, they're battling Florida State, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M. And for Jones, he's taken recent visits to places like Tennessee, Texas A&M, USC, and Florida. But Nebraska at the top or near the top for both of those guys.
All right. Now, of course, David Sanders, the 5-star offensive tackle, was on campus for an official visit over the weekend. We're going to hit on him in a minute. But before we get to him, who are a few other top guys Nebraska fans need to keep an eye on right now?
Well, let's start with Bixby High on 300 offensive tackle Broderick Shull, who the RPM favors Auburn for, but his last 2 visits have been to Nebraska, where both experiences have blown him and his family away from, again, getting time around Coach Raiola in that offensive line room and Coach Rule and that staff. Getting around the ag school, just seeing how Nebraska is a place that really fits his personality. I think he feels very comfortable in Lincoln. He took that visit in April, the week before the spring game, so he could get one-on-one time with the staff without other prospects being there. And then this past weekend, he took his official visit. There were only 3 other official visitors. So again, a lot of intimate time with the staff. His sister learned how to play poker with offensive coordinator Coach Satterfield. So that's how intimate this visit got. They broke some bread at Coach Rule's house. He came out of the visit saying Nebraska is his code number 1 with Auburn moving forward. So that's a big move at a very key pivotal position. You talked about David Sanders, another 5-star that Nebraska is really pushing for right now is athlete Michael Terry III out of the Lone Star State. He took his official visit for the spring game, and when he gets off the airplane, he sees the local newspaper with an article on him on the front top flap of the sports section. He felt the love right when he got off the plane. He thinks it's a good fit educationally, the right direction of the program he's talked about, and he just felt very comfortable around Coach McGuire and that staff as they view him as a playmaker on the perimeter that could be very dynamic in this passing offense moving forward. So Nebraska, they're swinging at some big-time guys across the country, some offensive linemen from California and Nevada, some skill players like Antonio Branch and Cortez Mills from Florida. Emmanuel Choice is a receiver that they love from Texas. They're in on some guys. I wouldn't be surprised if we look up and see Coach Rule and company signing yet another top 25 recruiting class.
Yeah, some really big names on the board, but none bigger than David Sanders, the number 1 offensive tackle in America, the number 2 ranked player overall. And when Sanders stepped on campus, so I got this from Sean Callahan over at Husker Online, but when Sanders stepped on campus this weekend, Nebraska hosted its single highest ranked official visitor in the history of the online recruiting era. So to say it was a massive visit is an understatement. Now, David Sanders was on campus for 2 days, brought his entire family, including his grandparents. Steve, what are we hearing coming out of this one?
Well, I think it just shows you the recruiting chops that Nebraska has, and they're not afraid to go after the best players in the country and compete against the best programs on the trail for top talent. And David Sanders comes to campus. It's his first visit. We'll see if he gets back for a game in the fall. We'll see what happens with his decision after he takes his official visits in June. Right now, I still like where Tennessee and Ohio State stand. An upcoming official visit to Georgia, I think, is going to be big because Georgia was one of the early front runners in this recruitment and certainly a finalist. But what I mean by that, Josh, is there was a time where I thought Georgia was number 1. Clemson's getting that first official visit May 31st weekend. That was the team he grew up pulling for. South Carolina, Alabama, rounding out the top 6. Did Nebraska make it a top 7? We'll see. I think I need to see him get back because he's been to those other schools so many times. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets back to Tennessee one more time here in May before he takes these June official visits. And Ohio State gets the last one. A lot of buzz around the Buckeyes and Vols right now, but David Sanders and his family looking for a place where the player development is top notch, where he feels like he's going to become the best version of himself as an offensive tackle. And then what you can do for him academically, he is a plus student and someone that takes that in very high regard. And then with all these elite players in the country, certainly there's an NIL component as well for David Sanders. We know Nebraska has a lot of backing behind this program right now, a lot of support for Matt Rule and company as they try and build this thing up.
Absolutely. Nebraska fans, a lot of support for the program. Tap in with me. Let me know. Comment section below. How do we feel about David Sanders? How do we want to build this class around TJ Lateef? Who are you thinking is the next to commit? Comment section below. All right, let's talk some quarterbacks. Now, Steve, you broke some big news on Julian Lewis on Friday that there is a new team in the mix for the 5-star quarterback out of Carrollton, Georgia. And it's not a team, it wasn't a team that I was expecting to jump in the race. So, Steve, break down what you got on Julian Lewis right now.
Well, Julian Lewis is going to return to Indiana for a second time this year. He was originally going to take an official visit to Georgia the weekend of May 31st. That visit opened up with Ryan Montgomery committing to Georgia. So he filled it with Indiana. He was there earlier this spring. There is not a coach in college football that Julian Lewis known longer than Indiana quarterback coach Tino Sunseri. He camped in Tallahassee when he was 8 years old, which also goes to show you the vision that Julian Lewis and his family had for where he is now. This was a long time coming. A lot of work poured into this for Julian Lewis, a Gatorade Player of the Year finalist, the Gatorade State Player of the Year in the state of Georgia. Back when he was 8 years old, he was putting in the work to become the quarterback he is today. And one of those places he went and learned was Florida State, where he got some time with Tino Sunseri. They've kept in touch. If Tino Sunseri was still at Alabama, I think Julian Lewis would be committed to Alabama right now. and he would be their quarterback in the 2025 class. He is instead committed to USC right now, playing set to potentially play for Lincoln Riley and that coaching staff with what he's done with quarterbacks, not only being first-round draft picks, but the number 1 pick and the Heisman Trophy winner. If you start for Lincoln Riley, you can almost lock those accolades in for you down the road. But Indiana, they're in it because of that relationship with Tino Sunseri, and we'll see if they can make a move on, first and foremost, USC. There's a lot of momentum around Auburn right now. He's going to take an official visit June 14th to the Plains, return there. He visited there a couple times this spring. I view them as the biggest challenger to flip him from USC. And then you have Colorado. They're an interesting program in this one too, because he's already been there a couple times this year. June 21st, official visit to Colorado, chance to start right away. The lights that surround that Colorado program, the media interest, Coach Shermer and his offense and pro background are some of the things that excite Julian Lewis and his family about Colorado. But Indiana fans should be super excited. They're getting one of the best quarterbacks in the country on campus. You look at their recruiting class, they have a sneaky good secondary in the fold right now, guys that I think can match up with and play against some of the best receivers in the country that you're going to see at places like Ohio State. So Indiana's program's on the rise. They're hoping to continue to show that to Julian Lewis when he comes back up May 31st weekend.
All right, so it looks like Julian Lewis's official visit schedule set, and the last one is going to be at the end of June to Colorado. I know he's committed to USC, so it's not like he needs to make a decision, but do you think he shuts down his recruitment, even if he remains at USC? Do you think he comes out and makes some sort of statement after official visits like, this is where I'm locked into?
Well, I think that anytime a prospect flips on his commitment, it's always something that could potentially happen again. I don't say that negatively. It's just what the process is. If he sticks with USC through this wave of official visits, I still think that proximity allows him to attend games in the fall at some of these other schools still that he was high on. And certainly seasons are played, so that could change the dynamic of any recruitment. So it's hard for me to close the book on a prospect. We have some prospects out there right now that have said that they're 100% shut down and not taking any other visits, that are still keeping some schools warm via the phone lines. So I'm always on guard for future visits and future flips. And look, these guys only get to go through the process once. The information changes daily. Personalities change, coaches change, seasons are played. There's so many moving parts in a recruitment here. But Julian Lewis, in a perfect world, he wants to make a final decision going into his final high school season and then enroll early at that school in December.
Yeah. All right. Julian Lewis committed to USC. Now, with TJ Lateef coming off the board, there are now only 3 uncommitted quarterbacks in the top 25. I want to talk about one of them right now, Madden Iamaleava. He's out of Long Beach, California, and with Lateef off the board, what's the latest with Madden?
Well, Chad Simmons, our colleague, director of recruiting here at On3, has kind of been out in front of this one for us. Has UCLA in a really good spot for Madden right now as we head into the summer. The Bruins have not had a top 25 recruiting class, Josh, since 2018, but you look at some of the guys that they're in on, including Madden, they got a chance to push for that this cycle. He would be a big pickup, and I think he would be someone that would attract some of these other blue chippers and high-profile West Coast guys to UCLA.
All right, let's switch gears here for a moment and talk a little 2026 quarterback recruiting, and we'll stay right at the top with the elite of the elite. Number 1 quarterback, Faison Brandon, has locked in a couple visits. Steve, what's the latest here, and who are kind of the main players that are emerging?
Yeah, so Faison told me that his upcoming visit schedule begins with Tennessee on June 1st. Then he's going to get to Ohio State on June 10th. LSU is set for June 15th. Alabama, June 22nd, and then Penn State, July 27th. Look, we feel Tennessee is the early front runner. He's been there numerous times. Coach Halsey, Coach Heupel, he wants to continue building a better relationship with them. He says every time I continue to go there, he learns more about how they develop quarterbacks, which is very important to him. He enjoys every visit he's had. Tennessee is the one that we point to setting the bar early. But there are several schools that he's high on, so we'll see how we feel after this wave of summer visits. LSU is looking to land the number one quarterback for a second straight cycle. They have Bryce Underwood in the fold in 2025. They would love for Faison Brandon to come in and be the guy to push him and the guy who wins the job. It's a hell of a quarterback competition. That's what you want. You want to get these elite guys in the room competing, and the cream rises to the top, and that's how you win national championships. You come there, you bet on yourself. Maybe you get a Jaden Daniels outcome, Heisman Trophy, and number 2 pick in the NFL draft is pretty damn good. But Faison Brandon, speaking of that, likes the way that they develop quarterbacks. He talked about the VR technology that LSU has, virtual reality. I've heard George McIntyre talk about that when he was going through his process. So LSU's got some cool tools that allow their quarterbacks to be their best versions of themselves. He had a really good visit to Alabama. He was offered during his Alabama visit in the spring. He likes the new coaching staff, what they did with Michael Penix, how competitive any team Kalen DeBoer is coaching. You're in the national title hunt, basically, with him in the corner office, the standard of Alabama. He likes the style of offense when he watched the spring practice. So Alabama, they're in a sneaky position for him. And I think we've talked about this before with some other guys, Josh. They don't have a 2025 committed. So I don't know how that's going to play out. Certainly they're trying to flip some guys, but if Alabama doesn't land a quarterback in the 2025 cycle, I think that's got to look real juicy for a 2026 quarterback to come in and kind of have that gap year between them and someone that they took from the high school ranks. Ohio State, you never count them out for a quarterback with what Ryan Day has done and what his offense looks like. And we've been talking about Penn State a lot, haven't we, with these elite quarterbacks? They're in the middle of it for everybody, and that's because of Coach Danny O'Brien. He's an electric recruiter now for them at that position, building meaningful relationships with all the top guys, and he's done that here with Faison Brandon.
All right, let's talk about another quarterback that just announced that he's probably coming off the board in the next 5, 6, 7 weeks. Dia Bell, American Heritage. He's the number 4 quarterback on the On3 industry. On3 likes him a little bit more. He's the number 2 quarterback here in our rankings. Now, we talked about Dia Bell yesterday on the Inside Scoop, and he's kind of starting to narrow it down. He says, quote, I feel like there are a couple of schools that have solidified themselves pretty well. Then there are some schools that I have to keep building the relationships with and see where that takes me with them. Now, to me, it might be a little bit too late if you got to make up ground on Dia Bell. If he's truly making his decision at the end of June, early July, Steve, who do you think the real players are for his commitment?
Well, I think in the beginning, I would have pointed towards Miami, I would have pointed towards LSU, and I would have pointed towards Penn State, and those 3 are certainly high on his list. I think Texas has definitely moved into the thick of this one. Chad Simmons, director of recruiting at On3, with the report yesterday that we're talking about today. The only visit that Dia Bell has scheduled right now is Texas for June 1. He had a fantastic time there back in the spring. I talked with Dia Bell a little bit this morning about some of the best relationships that he has in college football right now. And he said, I feel comfortable with a bunch of guys. And it started with Coach Kotelnicki and Coach O'Brien at Penn State, then Coach Sloan at LSU, Coach Milwee at Texas, Coach Sheridan at Alabama. You got Will Stein from Oregon, Coach Chip Kelly at Ohio State, Coach Dawson at Miami. He loves that offense. And the one thing Dia said about Miami that stood out to me, the day Mario Cristobal was hired, it really jacked him up about Miami football and the direction, the way they were recruiting local guys, the chance to play with some guys that he's known for a long time. I think that visit he took to Texas in the spring was a major, major needle mover. He said he grew up an Ohio State fan. Again, Penn State's probably recruiting him as well as anybody. Yeah. So this is going to be a fun one to track going into the summer. He listed a lot of other coaches, man. So he's a guy that has kept a lot of schools warm, from Florida to Auburn to Tennessee, Mississippi State. SMU. So Dia Bell, his phone rings often, and he takes those calls.
All right, we'll have to see if Dia Bell is truly ready to come off the board. It's not too far away. You guys let me know, comment section below. Where do you think these top quarterbacks are going to land? All right, let's head down to the Bayou, talk a little offensive line recruiting for LSU. Offensive line recruiting all across the country is really starting to heat up. We see LSU with 3 committed so far. They have Tyler Miller, Devin Harper, and Brett Borderland, and they're still looking for more. There's a couple elite names on the board. We got Solomon Thomas, Micah DeBose, Carius Kern, and Lamont Rogers. Steve, Solomon Thomas, though, he's committed to FSU, but he's got a visit lined up with LSU. What are you hearing here?
5-star Michael Fasusi is another name, Josh, that we should throw on at the end. Chad Simmons reporting that he'll take a visit there this summer. When you look at the foundation of any Brian Kelly team that he's had in his career, it starts with terrific offensive line play. Tough, physical, athletic guys at the point of attack has always been the heartbeat of his program and what he particularly builds that offense around. So no surprise that they're trying to recruit a big class again at the position. They've recruited some of the best offensive lines in the country since he's been in Baton Rouge. And then you see the development on the field. So Solomon Thomas currently committed to Florida State. Mike Norvell and company know they're going to have to battle to keep him in the fold, whether that's Miami, LSU, whoever. He's the number 1 interior offensive lineman in the country. That kind of just surprised, just in a surprise fashion, just dropped his commitment to Florida State. Certainly he's high on the Seminoles, but there's a lot of other schools he's keeping warm, LSU being one of them. Yeah,
and now Micah DeBose, trending heavily to LSU a couple weeks ago. I think he still is if you look at the recruiting prediction machine. And I thought maybe he was on the verge of committing to the Tigers, but he has not. And since then, we've seen Ohio State enter his recruitment. We've seen Florida State. We know Auburn's been there for a while. What do you make of Micah DeBose, and do you feel that he's still trending to LSU?
Well, I think Alabama's the other program that you got to keep a close eye on.
Sure.
I think that there are people around Baton Rouge that feel like they'll ultimately land Micah DeBose, but I think that's the feeling in Tuscaloosa as well. The one thing we know is this is a young man that wants to keep taking visits. He was recently at Alabama, and I felt like there was a lot of momentum around Alabama, Coach Cap, Coach DeBoer, and that new program. But certainly there's been times where LSU has looked like the front runner here as well. So this could be just one of those old school Alabama, LSU recruiting battles. And we used to see Nick Saban go into Louisiana and break LSU's heart every once in a while for a blue chipper. Brian Kelly and company trying to return the favor to this new Alabama coaching staff going into that state and beating the Crimson Tide for Micah DeBose.
Speaking of going into a neighboring state, Carius Kern from Marion, Arkansas is also trending to LSU. He's a top 100 prospect, the number 6 ranked interior offensive lineman in the country. Is he another prospect that LSU is making a priority out of state?
Absolutely. They love this guy, and I think that one's going their way right now, but schools like Ole Miss trying to change the trajectory of that recruitment.
All right, and then you go to Texas, and you got Lamont Rogers and Michael Fasusi. Can LSU go into the state and land one of these two monsters? They're both top 50 players in the state of Texas.
Yeah, there's a lot of schools lining up for the 3 elite offensive tackles in the state of Texas with Fasusi, Lamont Rogers, and Ty Haywood. Those are 3 guys as coveted as any player at the point of attack in the country. And LSU pushing for those guys as well. And you know, I think Oklahoma's been a mainstay in those recruitments. Texas has been a mainstay in those recruitments. A&M rising with some of those guys. And then certainly the national programs involved as well.
Yeah, but LSU has a foot in the door. And like you said in the segment before, these games got to get played. And I like LSU on the field this season. Maybe they can carry some of that momentum onto the recruiting trail. LSU fans, tap in. Let us know, how do you feel about offensive line recruiting? Who's your top target? Let us know, comment section below. All right, big visit weekend at UCLA. And Steve Wiltfong, you put in a new recruiting prediction machine pick in favor of on 300 running back Carson Cox. And there's other big news. But first, let's talk about Carson Cox. Why do you like him to end up as a Bruin?
Well, talking to a couple sources with knowledge of the recruitment on Sunday evening, they say that UCLA has pulled into pole position for Carson Cox following his official visit over the weekend. Like we talked about at the top of the show, Josh, it's been since 2018 since UCLA's had a top 25 recruiting class. Yeah. Deshaun Foster and this first-year staff trying to change everything. There's so much energy around this Bruins program on the trail. They just had a big visit weekend. They had a bunch of targets in for their spring game. They're bringing in more targets this coming weekend. I think under the last regime, we didn't see any prospects really visit in June. So we're in May. And so the recruiting is a major emphasis with this new staff. Carson Cox is the number 9 running back in the On3 rankings. He's a top 150 player overall. He's averaged over 10 yards per carry the last 2 seasons, 37 touchdowns over that span. Deshaun Foster, one of the better college running backs of yours and my life, Josh, when we were kids. Who wouldn't want to play for a guy like that? I think that UCLA leads for Carson Cox. And then again, over the weekend, they hosted some of their top offensive line targets, Josh. They had Manamaui Moody from Hawaii, who had a great visit. Zayari Addison from Florida. He's been to UCLA 5 times, Josh. If you follow the visits solely in this recruitment, it's looking pretty damn good for the Bruins as they battle powerhouse programs from coast to coast. He's going to be at Georgia this weekend. Speaking of powerhouses, Darius Afalava from Utah is a guy that's starting to really blow up. USC recently offered, but UCLA and Coach Castillo's track record of coaching in the NFL for a long time speaks to him. Same for 4-star offensive lineman Aaron Dunn. So UCLA in the middle of it for a lot of their top targets, and they're rolling up their sleeves and recruiting at a high level right now. And we'll see if they can get into the top 25 here for the first time in 7 years.
Hey, yeah, it's really good to see Deshaun Foster putting a little energy back in that program out west. All right, Steve, let's end the show with some commitment talk. Texas A&M landed one. We saw UGA land a commitment. Michigan State, I believe, at least you had 2 out of 3 of these predicted. Am I right on that?
So we had Sellers. I had that one. I had Damari Malone. I had that one, and then
pretty sure you had Blackshear.
We had them all.
There
Chad
you go.
Simmons. Yeah, Chad Simmons led the charge on the coverage of Thomas Blackshear. Georgia receiver recruiting is very interesting right now, as they're in on some of the top guys in the country at the position. Travis Smith and CJ Wiley are the coveted in-state guys. CJ Wiley expected back on campus this weekend for the scavenger hunt as they battle Auburn, Florida State, Tennessee, among others for him. Travis Smith also some of those same programs as well. I have an RPM already logged for Georgia for Travis Smith and CJ Wiley is one of our favorite receivers in the country. Eugene Hilton Jr., where I live in Zionsville, Indiana, he's told me over the weekend that Georgia's still his number 1. He's going to take his official visit in June. A couple official visitors next weekend. You have Travis Smith, and then you have Talon Taylor from the Chicagoland, who I have an RPM in favor of Georgia for. Derek Meadows from Las Vegas, I think his favorite head coach might be Kirby Smart right now. He's going to be there in a couple weekends, a return trip for his official visit after a strong spring visit. And then this weekend, you got Marcus Harris from Mater Dei, Phillip Bell from Mission Viejo taking their official visits from California. Cortez Mills is up from Florida. So there is no shortage of high-profile, touted receivers looking at Georgia right now, and Thomas Blackshear sewed up his spot in the class. And then Texas A&M, they go out and land Kobe Sellers, adding him to a recruiting class that now ranks number 12 by On3. And he told me a couple guys that he's recruiting to join him, Josh, is the number 1 ranked safety in the land, Jonah Williams, and Max Granville, an On300 linebacker out of Sugar Land, Texas. Now, I already have the RPM on Jonah Williams. I think I might soon have it on Max Granville. He is currently considered an Oklahoma lean per the On3 RPM. Texas A&M is right there with the Sooners, if not ahead of the Sooners, right now. And then for Michigan State, they go out and land Damari Malone. This new coaching staff has really put an emphasis on the Midwest and in-state targets. This is a big-bodied, rangy outside linebacker that they're also going to train up to play the Mike position, but he's going to start at outside linebacker. Forces a lot of turnovers, 3 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles as a junior, recovered 2 fumbles. So he's a playmaker in the second level, a guy that's extremely excited to play for Jonathan Smith and this new coaching staff. So Michigan State, a nice pickup for them from in-state. And that will do it for today's episode of the Wiltfong Whip Around. Thanks for tuning in. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you can catch this content and all your other favorite content from On3. We will be back on Thursday to preview Georgia's scavenger hunt and talk about some of the other major recruiting storylines going on from across the country.